output to boost prices. The markets reacted. Meanwhile, warships from Beijing and Washington almost collided near Taiwan. There's a video, and it shows how brinkmanship can blow up a situation. In Afghanistan, 80 schoolgirls were poisoned. In the UK, the cost of living crisis continues to punish people. We'll tell you all about it, but it's not all bad news. There's a new pill for lung cancer, and it promises to cut down the risk of death by half. The headlines first. Indonesia hosts great power rivals and geopolitical foes. US, China, Russia, India, Pakistan, South and North Korea all come together for the Komodo naval drills. 49 countries are taking part in the exercise to train for humanitarian disasters. Belgium seeks answers from Ukraine. This is after reports say Belgian-made weapons were used by anti-Kremlin fighters in Russia. Belgium's Prime Minister says the weapons supplied to Kiev are strictly for defense purposes. In India, passenger trains resume service at the site of the deadly crash. Nearly 300 people have been killed in the triple train collision in the eastern state of Odisha. Friday's train disaster was India's worst rail tragedy in decades. Hong Kong's top court overturns the conviction of journalist Bao Choi. She was found guilty in 2021. She was making a documentary on pro-democracy protesters. It's a rare win for press freedom in Hong Kong ever since China imposed the national security law in 2020. Tokyo's Nikkei index closes at a three-decade high at over 32,200. Wall Street rallies helped by a bumper U.S. jobs report cheered investors. The Nikkei last finished above 32,000 in 1990. And those Monday blues could actually kill you. Fatal heart attacks are more common on a Monday, according to new research. The study says the chances of getting a heart attack on a Monday are 13% higher than other days. Have you heard of the phrase living in a bubble? It is used to describe someone who's isolated, disconnected from reality, someone who lives in an echo chamber. It can be used to describe the Chinese state too. They live in a bubble, fed with a daily dose of Communist Party propaganda. It's bad enough as it is, but it's dangerous when you start buying your own propaganda. Let me give you a recent example. Two Chinese experts, two Chinese officials, have given an assessment on India. They say India is no challenge for the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army. And this is not jingoistic bombast. This is their ignorance speaking. The men who made these statements are Zhao Xiaozhu and Zhang Qi. Both hold the position of what they call senior colonel in the Chinese military. They're members of what you can call the PLA's brain trust. They work with China's leading military universities. So what they think shapes the strategy of the Chinese army. And that's why their opinion matters. Last week, the PLA sent these officials to the Shangri-La dialogue. This is an annual security conference. It is hosted by Singapore, and it's attended by leading defense leaders and thinkers. So these PLA officials were there, and they spoke about India and the border standoff with China. I have their statements. Senior Colonel Zhao spoke about India's defense modernization. Listen to what he said. India is unlikely to catch up to China in the coming decades because of its weak industrial infrastructure, while China has built complex and systematic defense industrial platforms. And this is what his counterpart had to say. Senior Colonel Zhang, I'm quoting again, India has spared no effort in military modernization in a bid to become an impressive superpower as other countries have done. This was their opinion. They say India is lagging in defense manufacturing and hence poses no challenge to China. If this is the foundation of the PLA's military strategy, I say it's good news for India because it just demonstrates their ignorance. You see, there's a limited connection between military modernization and war preparedness. Modernization is about enhancing your country's military capabilities. It is important, yes, but only to an extent. Being ready for war involves a lot more than just having the latest and the greatest weapons. You need many other things to fight a war, like infrastructure, strategy, training, knowing the lay of the land, understanding the weakness of your adversary, and the experience of fighting and winning wars. We know that China is woefully inadequate in this department. China hasn't fought a war in more than 4 decades, so while the PLA's military may be growing, its soldiers remain untested. Most of China's military arsenal has not seen any real combat. The ability of their soldiers to use their weapons is unproven. Compare that to India. Our soldiers are in better shape, they know their weapons well, and they have combat experience. Do you know what else you need to fight a war? You need a robust economy. Now, China's economy is much bigger than India, no two ways about it. But at this point, it's too fragile to handle a war. Remember what I said about living in a bubble and buying your own propaganda? Chinese strategists are doing that. Their country is struggling with a deep debt crisis. Local governments are sinking, they owe large amounts of money, and they're running out of cash. We've been telling you about this. Last month, there was a serious crisis in Kunming. Reports said a local authority was on the verge of bankruptcy. They had to repay $170 million, but they did not have that money. So at the 11th hour, authorities issued new bonds. They were trying to raise more cash. And when these reports came out, local officials were quick to deny them. But one city after another is coming under stress. In Wuhan, they've started naming and shaming debtors. They've released hundreds of names to recover a sum of $42 million. Going by one estimate, local governments in China owe about $23 trillion. That's nearly twice the size of China's GDP. I'll repeat that. China's GDP is a little over $12 trillion. Local government debt is at a whopping $23 trillion. Can a country like this finance a war? And at what cost? Perhaps China's military thinkers should think about this. And here's what India should think about. The threat from China is real and it's not going away. The PLA may or may not have the appetite for war, but there's certainly no hurry to end the border standoff with India. So New Delhi must be prepared for all eventualities. The problem is the war in Ukraine. It is hurting India's preparedness. Supplies from Russia have not been steady, and now reports say Russia is buying back parts of weapons. It is repurchasing tanks and missiles that it exported earlier. A new report was published today. It talks about Russian buybacks. It says Russia is re-importing some military components, mostly parts for tanks and missiles. And what does Moscow plan to do with these? Install them in older weapons and deploy those weapons for the war in Ukraine. Next question. Where is Russia getting these parts from? India and Myanmar, according to reports. Both countries rely heavily on Russian military supplies, and now Russia is relying on them to upgrade its old weapons. There is customs data that refers to some shipments. 2 Russian manufacturers have been named: Ural Wagon Zavod and Russian NPK KBM. These are Russian companies. Apparently, they're buying back parts from India and Myanmar. Now, it is possible that these parts were defective and are being returned. It's possible that they will be replaced. But going by one claim, there were no records of these items being replaced, not until March 2023. So most likely, Russia is just keeping them for now, and it makes sense. Such parts are hard to come by for 2 reasons mainly. 1, the war is exhausting Russia's stocks. And 2, Western sanctions have hit Russia's manufacturing capabilities. Companies cannot find the components they need, so they're looking for alternatives, even breaking down civilian equipment like planes to cannibalize spare parts. So the plan to re-import parts makes sense. Russia's defense industry is under stress, and it has a bearing on countries that depend on Russia, which brings us to India. Defense deliveries to India have been running late. In March, the Indian Air Force made a statement. It said Russia is unable to deliver vital supplies. The Air Force said this to Indian lawmakers. There was a major delivery plan for this year, but the Air Force said it won't happen. It won't happen this year. Now, we don't have the specifics, but most experts agree that this is about the S-400 missile defense system. India has bought 5 of these from Russia. 3 of the systems have been delivered. 2 are awaited. And the IAF statement was telling. It was the first public admission of a shortfall from the Russian side. In the month of March, another report emerged. It said India would now get the pending deliveries by early 2024. Such delays tend to test the relationship. There are outstanding issues like payment for Russian supplies. Moscow recently complained about this. It said it has billions of rupees in Indian banks and nowhere to use them. Let me explain this. India and Russia have a trade mechanism in place, the rupee-ruble system. That is the mechanism. It is used to bypass the US dollar and Western sanctions. You see, Russia has been cut off from the global banking system, so India uses the rupee to buy Russian goods like oil and weapons. This money goes into an Indian bank account in Russia. Similarly, when Russia buys something from India, it pays in the ruble. The problem is that Russia doesn't buy very much from India. So there's a gap. It gets close to 1 billion Indian rupees every month, according to one estimate. And every quarter, this pile grows by 2 to 3 billion rupees. But since Moscow is not buying very much from India, it doesn't have a way to spend this cash. The same thing will happen when India gets Russian weapons. The same payment mechanism will be used. India will pay for those weapons in rupees, and Russia will not be able to use those rupees. As both sides try to resolve this, India is also reducing its dependence on Russia. Earlier, 62% of India's defense imports came from Russia. Now this number has dropped to just 45%. India has now shifted to other suppliers, countries like France, which now accounts for 29% of India's defense imports, and the US, which accounts for 11%. And this diversification is a good strategy because India cannot put all its eggs in the Russian basket. Moscow's war should not be allowed to compromise India's war preparedness. Is NATO coming to Asia? It's a question that many countries in the region are asking. Some say NATO is already here. They have partners in the Indo-Pacific. They're also opening an office in Japan. But what does NATO's Asian pivot mean? China is clearly unhappy about it. The defense minister made that clear at the Shangri-La dialogue. It's an annual security conference held in Singapore, like we just told you. All major powers attended. China's defense minister lashed out at NATO's Asian pivot. He said all such alliances will plunge the region into chaos. Listen to this.
In essence, attempts to push for NATO-like alliances in the Asia-Pacific are a way of kidnapping regional countries and exaggerating conflicts and confrontations, which will only plunge the Asia-Pacific into a vortex of disputes and conflicts.
Which alliances is he talking about? You have security groupings like the AUKUS and the Five Eyes Alliance. You also have more dynamic ones like the Quad. China opposes all of them. It says this is an attempt to contain Beijing's influence. Just one problem, though. These alliances did not appear out of thin air. They are a direct response to Chinese expansionism. Look at the partner countries. India is a member of the Quad. Philippines recently held four-way talks with the US, Japan, and Australia. These are not Western countries. These are Asian nations, fed up with Chinese belligerence. A free and open Indo-Pacific is in their interest as well. The only question is how to achieve that. Should NATO be imported into Asia? There are indications of such an attempt, not to recruit Asian members, but to create a wider community. And India figures prominently in that plan. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is in New Delhi. His visit comes weeks ahead of Prime Minister Modi's US trip. He's already met Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. Security cooperation topped the agenda. Talks are on to share fighter jet engine technology with India. New Delhi is also planning to buy 30 drones from the US. The deal is worth around $3 billion. It is consistent with India's long-term defense policy. Diversify purchases, build up local capabilities. But the US has something even bigger in mind. This is NATO Plus. Now, some quick facts. NATO Plus is an extended community of NATO. Right now, there are 5 members: Japan, South Korea, Australia, Israel, and New Zealand. How is this different from NATO? For starters, these countries are not Atlantic. They're Indo-Pacific and West Asian. But more importantly, there is no Article 5. Article 5 is the rule of collective defense. It does not apply to NATO Plus. And it's honestly a raw deal. You get all the responsibilities, but none of the protection. Then why bother joining it? NATO Plus offers easy intelligence sharing. It will also make military procurement easier. Say you want an American F-16 or an F-22. If you're part of NATO Plus, you could get a good deal. A US House panel wants India to be included in this setup, in NATO Plus. It's a panel that deals with China. It has the support of both Democrats and Republicans. But how should India see this offer? With a lot of apprehension. NATO Plus may not be a treaty alliance, but it's a clear sign of picking sides. If India joins NATO Plus, it would limit New Delhi's strategic autonomy. No more warm ties with Russia. Definitely no defense trade. Plus, India's relationship with the US is very different from other NATO Plus members. Australia and New Zealand fought 2 world wars on America's side. Japan and South Korea are treaty allies. Israel and the US share a special relationship, but India-US ties are very different from all of these. These warm exchanges are a recent phenomenon. Washington spent most of the last 70 years criticizing and sanctioning India, so New Delhi must be wary. It cannot become a pawn for NATO's new rivalry with China. The alliance is famous for its use and throw tactics. So the China challenge must be met on India's terms, which means no to alliance and yes to engagement. Even the US seems to be testing the waters right now. This NATO Plus idea was proposed by a US panel. It has not been officially offered by the US government. Seems like Washington was sending out feelers, trying to see what the reaction will be. So far, it's been tepid. NATO Plus comes with a lot of baggage, commitments, and demands. India would do well to steer clear. Someone tell that to China, though. They're not steering clear. They're hurtling towards trouble. Let me show you what happened in the Taiwan Strait. US and Canadian navies were holding a joint drill. It's rare but not unheard of. China, though, decided to spoil their party. A PLA warship cut in front of the US destroyer. As you can see it in these pictures, the Chinese ship dashes in front of the American one. And between them, just 137 meters. That's a very risky maneuver. We're talking about lethal ships here. Even the slightest miscalculation could have been disastrous. So what was China trying to do? Clearly send a message. We saw a similar incident involving fighter jets. A Chinese plane came within 400 feet of a US spy aircraft. Days later, this happens, a near collision between warships. It shows that China is becoming more brazen. They feel confident enough to buzz US fighter jets or to cut across US warships. China's defense minister has defended his navy at the Shangri-La talks. He says if you want to avoid such incidents, stay away from Taiwan.
To truly avoid these incidents, apart from making rules that we have to do as a last resort, the best way is for the countries, especially the naval vessels and fighter jets of countries, not to take closing actions around other countries' territorial sea and airspace. What's the point of going there? What does it have to do directly with your interests? To put it in our way, mind your own business and take good care of your own people, naval vessels and jets.
The big picture here is scary. China and the US are the largest militaries in the world. You don't want their warships colliding, certainly not in the Taiwan Strait. But China's intention is quite clear. They're trying to map out America's resolve to see how far they can push Joe Biden. And what's the assessment? Washington clearly wants to engage with Beijing, maybe not to reset ties, but at least to avoid mishaps. We saw an example of that in Singapore. The US sought a meeting with China's defense minister, Li Shangfu. Guess what? He refused. Li says the US must first show sincerity. Listen to this.
China has been seeking to build a new type of major country relationship with the US. But it requires the US side to show sincerity, match its words with deeds, and take concrete actions to meet China halfway, so as to push forward the stabilization of bilateral relations between the two countries and militaries.
As always, China says one thing but does another. The PLA has continuously harassed navies in the South China Sea. Such operations have become more frequent recently, but the US faces a dilemma here. If they keep ignoring Chinese provocations, it becomes the new normal. American allies will lose confidence in them. Plus, China will be emboldened. But if they do act, they risk an escalation. It could be the perfect excuse for China to attack Taiwan. That dilemma was evident in Lloyd Austin's speech. This is what he said.
The People's Republic of China continues to conduct an alarming number of risky intercepts of U.S. and allied aircraft flying lawfully in international airspace. We've all just seen another troubling case of aggressive and unprofessional flying by the PRC. So we will support our allies and partners as they defend themselves against coercion and bullying. To be clear, we do not seek conflict or confrontation.
So that was the tone at Shangri-La. A lot of blaming, a lot of veiled threats, but zero efforts to find a solution. In fact, there was agreement on just one issue, that war is a bad idea. China said a conflict with the US would bring unbearable pain. And the US said a war in Taiwan would be devastating.
It is undeniable that a severe conflict or confrontation between China and the US will be an unbearable pain for the world.
You know, the whole world has a stake in maintaining peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. The whole world. The security of commercial shipping lanes and global supply chains depends on it. And so does freedom of navigation worldwide. But make no mistake, conflict in the Taiwan Strait would be devastating.
Well, no war is too low a bar. Most countries were hoping for talks between China and the US, but at Shangri-La we saw the opposite. This is a relationship that is almost beyond saving. China seems to have realized that. The question is, will the US? Because they're still hoping for engagement, still talking about de-risking from China. And all of that signals confusion. Washington needs to decide how it will deal with China. Do they see China as a competitor or a rival? And that definition will be key to the future of the Indo-Pacific. Of course, that doesn't mean ending all engagement. Talks are important to avoid miscalculations, to do the bare minimum. One such example is the Komodo naval drills in Indonesia. Around 49 countries are participating. Wait till you hear the list. The US, China, and Russia. Some of the biggest rivals are holding drills together. India and Pakistan, North and South Korea. Beyond the symbolism, such drills are key to keeping lines of communication open. Even today, Russia and the US have channels open. It's not about repairing relations, it's about preventing a further meltdown. But China clearly is not interested in that. So the US needs to take a call. Do they keep ignoring such near collisions and maneuvers, or do they take a harsher stance? Everyone loves a good surprise, maybe a nice birthday party or a gift. But surprises are best left to our personal lives. In geopolitics, the premium is on stability and predictability. Boring, but necessary. But Saudi Arabia missed the memo. This weekend, the kingdom decided to slash oil output. They will produce 1 million fewer barrels in July. But that's not the full story. Saudi Arabia is going solo here. The oil cartel, OPEC Plus, has stuck to its previous cuts. They're not increasing cuts. Only Saudi Arabia has announced new cuts. Listen in to their energy minister.
As we have done in April, whereby the countries that had agreed to do the voluntary cuts have extended that voluntary cuts to end of 24. And I would have to call it the Saudi lollipop, which is 1 million barrel of reduction for the start that starts at the 1st of July. And that million is also extendable.
Interesting choice of words. Oil is arguably the most important commodity of our times. Dropping surprise bombs in that market is certainly not a Saudi lollipop, as he puts it. So why is Riyadh doing it? To prop up prices. In the months after Russia's invasion, oil was booming. Let's look at Brent crude. It's an oil index. In June 2022, Brent crude was $112. That's $112 per barrel. And now, $76 per barrel. It had fallen to nearly $70 by late May. Now that's bad news for the Saudi kingdom. Around 50% of their economy is built on oil. So what do? They reduce oil production to boost prices. It's economics 101. There are two ways to increase prices. You either boost the demand or you reduce the supply. Saudi Arabia went for the latter. They reduce the supply. They need higher prices to fund their grand diversification plans. But how high? The International Monetary Fund says $80 per barrel. That's what they need. At that price, Riyadh will be comfortable. But why isn't that happening? Why is that rise not happening organically? Because the global economy is not growing fast enough. Look at any industry. Travel has not reached pre-pandemic levels. Neither has factory output. So the demand for oil continues to be stagnant. Prices are not racing towards $100 a barrel. They're falling towards $70. Hence, the surprise announcement by Saudi Arabia. But there's a flip side to it. Higher oil prices can fuel inflation. That's what happened in 2022. Central banks have been raising interest rates to keep prices under control. They were just about to hit the pause button. But if oil rallies again, all bets are off. So what scenarios are we looking at? The most optimistic one is this. There is a grand economic recovery in the second half of this year. Factory production rises, people start flying again, so the demand for oil rises organically. That would bring stability to the market. If not, there could be trouble. Rising oil prices will worsen the cost of living crisis. How is India placed to tackle this problem? Well, there is some good news. We're not as dependent on Saudi Arabia. Around 40% of India's oil imports now come from Russia. That's more than Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Iraq combined. And since Russia has not announced any cuts yet, the impact on India will be limited. Having said that, it's not all rosy. 85% of India's oil is imported. New Delhi is ultimately at OPEC's mercy, like all non-oil producers. It's a major drawback of the global system. One so-called lollipop, and you pay extra at the pump. Speaking of hiked prices, let's turn our attention to the UK, the sick man of Europe. While inflation has been falling everywhere else, it remains stubbornly high in the UK. It is going down, but not fast enough. Of particular concern is food inflation. Food prices are about 20% higher than they were last year. This keeps aggravating their cost of living crisis, and their government still doesn't know how to address it. Last week, they were looking into putting price caps at supermarkets. Indians are familiar with the concept of a maximum retail price. But that isn't standard practice in the UK, and unsurprisingly, some companies are not willing to implement it. How will they price gouge if there's a cap? This is a standoff in the making between the government and supermarkets, and now a new idea has been floated, a universal basic income. Our next report has more.
What would you do if you were assured about $2,000 a month? Guaranteed that amount in your bank account. You may not have to worry about making ends meet. If that stress melted away, would you focus on your career more? Or would you stop working and take it easy? That's what the UK is trying to find out. A think tank called Autonomy is looking to conduct a pilot program. A pilot for universal basic income. It plans to test it out on 30 people in 2 areas in England. It wants to study how these people behave. The think tank hopes that the findings will pave the way to introduce universal basic income in the UK. Because, let's face it, the UK might need this. The country is suffering at the hands of inflation, more than almost anywhere else in Europe. Every country was hit by a cost of living crisis when the war in Ukraine erupted last year. But no one seems to be dealing with it worse than the UK. Inflation hit a 40-year high of 11.1% last October. It has climbed down now, but not enough. The latest figures show inflation at 8.7% in April. It was slightly more than expected, but that's not the biggest problem. It's what's driving inflation that's worrying policymakers in Rishi Sunak's government. Food inflation.
Whilst it is welcome that the headline rate of inflation has fallen, these numbers show there is absolutely no room for complacency in the battle against inflation. Food price inflation is still worryingly high. That's why we've had food producers, farmers in supermarkets in to talk about what we can do to reduce the pressure there.
Food and non-alcoholic beverage prices rose by 19.1% year-on-year in April. Almost 20%, for essentials like bread, milk and eggs. You can see why it has the British government worried. How long can people keep paying 20% extra for these basics? Or continue to deal with general inflation over 8%?
And it's currently running between 8.7 and 10%. What we've also had, because of the war in Ukraine, is vast increase in energy costs, and also food costs in the UK have bills have increased between 16 and 20% in the last 12 months. So everybody's feeling the strain, regardless of the level of income that they've got.
The Sunak administration is scrambling to bring food inflation in check. Their solution? Introduce price caps at supermarkets. The government floated this idea last week, and it immediately faced a backlash from major supermarket chains. Even though the price caps would be voluntary, the supermarket tycoons aren't having it. The British Retail Consortium put out a message. They said that the government should not focus on recreating 70s-style price controls. They should work on cutting red tape instead. Of course, the supermarkets would prefer the loosening of government regulations, but they're just the latest to rebel against the government. For months, the officials at 10 Downing Street have faced stiff resistance. Railway workers, nurses, paramedics, everyone has been taking to the streets. Everyone wants a pay rise to deal with the crippling cost of living. Sunak's government doesn't think this is feasible. They say it'll cost too much, empty the treasury. So it's been pushing back against striking workers. Downing Street even wants to enact a new law to undermine the right to strike. That's how much it's against increasing wages. In this scenario, it seems impossible that the government would agree to universal basic income, no matter what the findings are. But the think tank proposing the radical solution may not have to worry much. The study will be over around the next general election, and the way things stand at the moment, this government's inability to handle inflation may lead to their ouster.
The BBC chairman is rigorous, it's transparent, it's set out.
Now let's turn our attention to Afghanistan. Almost 80 schoolgirls, 80 schoolgirls there have been poisoned. This happened over the weekend in the Sarepol province in northern Afghanistan. 2 schools were targeted. 60 girls were poisoned in the first school, 17 in the second. The girls were primary school students from classes 1 to 6. The authorities claim that all these girls were rushed to hospital and that they're all fine now. But very few details have been given. No confirmation about the poison used, no word on how the attackers managed to poison these girls, no details about the injuries that the girls have sustained. And it's only girls. The authorities just said that they are now in quote-unquote good condition. We do hope they are. But what's happened is alarming. Who is targeting Afghan schoolgirls? The authorities say this is a case of a personal grudge and that the suspect allegedly paid a third party to carry out these attacks. This is an initial report based on the investigation by the Provincial Education Department. And this is all that they're willing to share for the moment. The department officials have not been too forthcoming. This is not the first time or the first incident of poisoning in Afghanistan, but this is the first since the Taliban took power in 2021. In the last 2 years, they have systematically attacked women's education. They're not allowed to study or work. Education for girls is allowed only up to the age of 12. After that, they're barred from school and college. And after what happened over the weekend, it seems even children are not safe in schools. School poisonings are a preferred modus operandi of hardliners. Look at neighboring Iran. It has become a regular occurrence in Iran. The first reports came last November. Schoolgirls were poisoned in the city of Qom. It's a holy city, and it made news for all the wrong reasons. Since then, more than 1,000 Iranian schoolgirls have been poisoned. None of the children reportedly died, but that may not have been the intention. Let me quote from the UN Human Rights Office report in March. This is what it says. Many parents have removed their daughters from school for fear of these attacks. The United States also weighed in on the matter. This is what they said.
Women and girls everywhere have a fundamental right to education. Time and time again, it has been demonstrated that when women and girls receive an education and are able to contribute to their economies, it benefits society as a whole. So the possibility that girls in Iran are being possibly poisoned simply for trying to get an education is shameful and it's unacceptable, and our thoughts remain with the victims and their families.
Both seem to imply that the attacks were about one thing: stopping girls from receiving an education. But since then, the world seems to have moved on, and the schoolgirls keep facing attacks. The poisonings in Iran have not stopped completely. Reports keep popping up from time to time, which means that schoolgirls keep getting pulled out of school. And now the trend has crossed the border and returned to Afghanistan. It seems like an insidious plot to stop the education of women, to relegate them to the background, and the world doesn't seem to care enough. Every time this kind of news comes out, there's a loud reaction but no action. There are appeals to conduct a fair investigation, catch the people responsible. But where's the follow-up? Without concrete action, these attacks will continue. They'll also spread. Once people see that no one is stopping them, they will continue poisoning schoolgirls with impunity, and this has to stop. Our next story is about lung cancer. Heavy story for a Monday, I know, but trust me, this one has a happy ending. You already know that lung cancer is a public health crisis. It is the deadliest kind of cancer, the world's leading cause of cancer death. It kills about 1.8 million people every year. But this could all change very soon. A new global research is out. It studied the effects of a medicine over the span of a decade. And it says that this pill halves the risk of death from lung cancer. Now, a reduction of 50% is a big deal for any disease, but in the case of lung cancer, it is even more thrilling because this cancer is resistant to most therapies. And now it seems to have met its match. Our next report tells you more.
Cancer is devious. It's a disease in which cells in the body grow out of control. Cancer in the lungs is mainly caused by cigarette smoking. Lung cancer is the world's leading cause of cancer deaths. About 1.8 million people die each year because of it. Hungary, Serbia and France have the highest rates of lung cancer cases. The US saw over 230,000 cases of lung cancer in 2018. What about India? During the same year, India saw about 68,000 cases, and this number is on the rise. Compared to the situation just a decade ago, here's a grim prediction. India is likely to witness a 7-fold rise in cases of lung cancer by 2025. So while the data is different for different countries, one thing is common for all. Lung cancer is a hidden public health emergency. And for decades now, scientists have tried to fight its statistics. They've developed aggressive therapies. They've tried to catch it early, to increase the chances of patient survival. Now, they use artificial intelligence tools as well. Snake-like robots that can slither down humans' lungs. But despite arduous efforts, lung cancer continues to persist. So scientists develop something different, which has less to do with catching the disease and more with combating the repercussions. They created a wonder pill, if we may say so. It's a medicine called osimertinib, and it may have a complicated name, but it has one simple mission: to reduce the risk of death by lung cancer. Does it really work? Well, the result might surprise you. Yale University conducted research on the effects of the pill. They studied it for a decade, and now their report is out. It says that this pill a day keeps the risk of death away. Literally, this drug reduces the risk of death from lung cancer by 51%. It has to be taken daily, but it only works on a certain type of lung cancer. It's called a non-small cell cancer, which is the most common type. It affects about 10 to 25% of lung cancer patients in the US and Europe, and 30 to 40% in Asia. So effectively, this pill can reduce the risk of death by half. And expectedly, this news has created quite a stir. Doctors are calling it thrilling, not a word that they use often, because halving the risk of death in any disease is revolutionary. But in the case of lung cancer, it's even more so. Why? Because lung cancer is resistant to therapies, and for most patients in advanced stages, there is no cure. So this drug could save the lives of millions across the world. Patients in the UK, US, and some other countries are already able to access it. It has been administered to 700,000 people, and after this new study, doctors expect this pill to become the standard of care. A groundbreaking drug to save countless lives. It could help about a quarter of lung cancer patients worldwide each year. And more than anything, this medicine is a beacon of hope. It can greatly improve the odds of survival in lung cancer patients. So this wonder pill is nothing short of life-changing.
Have you heard of present bias? It's a term associated with human behavior. And what does it mean? It refers to difficulty in making lifestyle changes today to prevent a catastrophe in future. And we humans suffer from it. We are bad at addressing the risks of tomorrow because we often don't alter our behavior today. But why am I ambushing you with this reality check? Because I'm going to be talking about climate change, which is probably one of the biggest repercussions of our present bias. And why are we bringing this up tonight? Because today is World Environment Day. It is one of the biggest international days for the environment, and this tradition dates back to 1973. More than 150 countries are observing it. But what does it even mean? And can our actions, big or small, really make a difference? Our next report tells you. In New York, an art project made entirely of plastic waste. In India, a human chain along the banks of river Yamuna.
We are asking people to wake up and clean the Yamuna River.
In South Africa, food waste being recycled.
The world is in crisis. We all know about climate change, that our world is in trouble. We all have to do our bit.
3 different projects with different causes at heart, much like thousands of other campaigns in over 150 countries. But all of them talking about one thing, our environment. Because today is June 5th, World Environment Day. And this isn't just any other Monday. It is a global platform for environmental outreach. It calls for equal parts celebration and anger, all of it devoted towards the protection of this world. Each year, this day brings hope, collective action, and a much-awaited theme. And this year, the theme is Beat Plastic Pollution. It urges countries to look for solutions to plastic pollution, and that tracks. After all, the stakes couldn't be higher. We produce 430 million tons of plastic every year. Plastic waste pollution has doubled in the last decade. It is predicted to triple by 2060. Only 9% is recycled globally. Plastic pollution also has social and economic costs, which can go up to $600 billion every year. This is a crisis, and it's choking our world. Many of you may wonder, if this is such a big problem, why aren't our governments acting on it? Well, they're trying. The world could soon have a treaty to curb plastic pollution. It would be the first such legally binding global treaty. 170 countries have agreed to develop its first draft. While this sounds like too little too late, experts say it is a preliminary but crucial step. Because the world has deferred climate action for so long, and not just at the policy level, but also at a personal level. Our governments have certainly not done enough for climate change, but neither have we. Often what stops us is one common but vexing question. Can one person's actions really make a difference? If you have asked this before, you're not alone. The problem is so big, and our daily plastic use seems quite small. But personal action is inextricably linked to international cooperation. Without individual effort, there is no collective action either. If individuals hadn't come together, the Sunrise Movement wouldn't have camped out in the halls of US Congress, or India's iconic Chipko movement wouldn't have made waves. Climate action needs crusaders, a sea of them. So while we are scared for our future, our actions in the present must be loud. And no, that doesn't mean that you have to go on the streets holding banners demanding climate action. And if going cold turkey on plastic is too daunting, take the first step and minimize its use. Do other simple things, like stop wasting food and reduce your car use. Save fuel and save the planet as well. And it's not too late to make a difference. Of course, we also need ambitious government policies because we've already dangerously warmed the planet. Some parts of the world are burning, others are drowning. Some have off-season snowstorms and others are desertifying. The world is on fire, literally. So every day should be our own environment day. It may feel like a lost cause, but the future isn't set in stone. A different future remains possible, and it is up to us to decide which one plays out. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with India, an under-construction bridge collapsed in the state of Bihar. This particular bridge collapsed for the second time in 14 months. In Indonesia, worshippers climbed to the top of an active volcano to perform a religious ceremony. And June is the Pride Month. In Thailand, members of the LGBTQ community held a Pride parade in Bangkok. And finally, what makes the 5th of June significant? We're taking you back in history. On this day in 1967, a 6-day war began in West Asia. This war was fought between Israel and Arab states, the states of Egypt, Jordan and Syria. The brief but bloody battle was a result of years of diplomatic friction. The war ended with a UN-brokered ceasefire, but it changed the map of West Asia. Leaving you with that. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yes. Now, just let us try to understand the signaling system. The logic says it's an absolutely software-based, software logic-based system. The logic says if any point is set in a reverse direction, then the signals behind it would be either yellow or green. But in this case, it did not happen.
Right.
Two signals. Distant signal was green. The home signal was green. Then what went wrong? The experts say the signaling failure can't happen without a human intervention. You may ask, humans are involved in the train operations, but the probable human intervention in this case is different in nature.
Right.
Let's just understand why EI signaling system is operated from the it's operated from the station building itself and by either station manager or by the
right. So there could be a sabotage angle. Thank you, Dhrubajyoti, for getting us those latest details. This horrific incident that has taken place in Odisha, where close to 300 people have lost their lives. The charges coming in thick and fast from the TMC and the Congress calling for Ashwini Vaishnav's resignation. Now, I want to ask both the Congress and the TMC spokespersons, both your party chiefs, Mallikarjun Kharge and Mamata Banerjee, have served as railway ministers. Can they boast of a stellar safety record? I'll take that first question with the Congress.
I don't want to engage in whataboutery and how does it matter what our safety record was when it was. The question is, in this particular incident, why it has occurred and what were the warning signs that led us here. And those are the things that we actually have to consider.
Why I'm asking that question is because you're asking for Ashwini Vaishnao's resignation. That's why.
Yes, and it's because that we have in the past taken moral responsibility when accidents like this have occurred and resigned, whether it was Lal Bahadur Shastri, whether it was Madhav Scindia, whether it was even Nitish Kumar under the NDA.
What about Mallikarjun Kharge?
Who take moral responsibility when accidents of this form actually happen. We have to talk about this is the worst accident that has happened in almost a quarter of a century. I want to get down to the facts of what were there any warning signs that could have helped us prevent this accident. And I want to start by talking about first the CAG report on derailment in Indian Railways, which stated that from 2017 to 2021, there were 1127 derailments, and a lot of them, or a majority of them, were because of shortfalls in inspections. The amount of money that has been given for track renewal has been decreased every year and has not even been utilized. You set that apart and you look at the fact that there are 312,000.
Hello and welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jamwal. Breaking news coming in from the United States, where former United States Vice President Mike Pence has officially entered the 2024 presidential race. He will face off against his former boss, Donald Trump, in the fight for the White House, and in this case, the fight for the Republican ticket when it comes to the presidential elections. Mike Pence, the former Vice President of the United States, has thrown his hat into the ring. He will take on Donald Trump for the Republican ticket to become the presidential candidate in the run-up to the 2024 presidential elections. Now, Mike Pence has entered that race. Remember, there was a lot of discord between Donald Trump and Mike Pence in the wake of the previous elections, where we saw the assault on the Capitol building. Remember, when the Capitol building was assaulted, a lot of Donald Trump supporters were shouting outside saying, "Hang Mike Pence," because Donald Trump has said that if Mike Pence wanted as vice president, he could overturn the elections, because Donald Trump, remember, claimed there was widespread rigging when it comes to the previous elections, which he lost to current President Joe Biden. But now, Mike Pence throwing his hat into the ring, he will take on Donald Trump when it comes to the Republican ticket for the race towards the White House, which has already kicked off for that matter, where Ron DeSantis has also entered the race for the Republican ticket to take on Donald Trump for the Republican nomination for the presidential race. Remember, for now, Donald Trump is leading the charge when it comes to the majority of Republican voters, but now Mike Pence as well as Ron DeSantis have thrown their hats into the ring. I'm joined by my colleague Abhishek Jha, who's getting us this piece of breaking news. Abhishek, so a big announcement coming in from the United States. Mike Pence, the VP to Donald Trump, now will take on his former boss. But when it comes to appealing to the MAGA base, the Trump base, they will now completely turn on him. Donald Trump will turn up the heat on Mike Pence when it comes to the fight for the Republican ticket. We all remember those visuals from outside the Capitol building where Trump supporters were shouting, "Hang Mike Pence."
Ayushman, we can look at this whole development in a different way also, because the Donald Trump even now presents a very radical face of the Republican side, while Mike Pence for all the event that has happened in the Capitol, and later when we got to know a lot about who acted in what way, Mike Pence sounds like a little moderate among Republicans. So not necessarily that Mike Pence will be the vote bank what Donald Trump has, but still it's going to be very interesting, because now it is three candidates are very much in the fray. Mike Pence, Donald Trump, his former boss in a way, and we have Joe Biden also going for the race for 2024 elections. So clearly big wigs of U.S. politics are going to be in the fight for the next presidential election, and the kind of political scenario that is evolving in USA. Earlier it was believed that Kamala Harris could also be one of the contenders while the elections were still fresh last time. But now it doesn't look like Kamala Harris is going to be the next candidate also, because now already Joe Biden has announced his candidature. There are other candidates also but still a very interesting time. We'll have to see how in the next few months, few more candidates may announce their candidature or their aspirations to run for the presidential election for 2024.
Right, and at the same time, as you're pointing out, Abhishek, Mike Pence, entering the race, it's a different dynamic that he brings to the entire race. But Donald Trump, there came a point where he wasn't very sharp with his language against Mike Pence. Remember, he till this day blames Mike Pence for losing the previous elections to Joe Biden, saying that Mike Pence had the power to overturn the elections. Now, clearly, because Donald Trump still hasn't conceded the entire presidential fight, now he will sharpen his language. But at the same time, will Mike Pence respond in kind and also sharpen his language against Donald Trump? Because even after the Capitol riots, when Donald Trump supporters were shouting, "Hang Mike Pence," he still did not openly attack Donald Trump for unleashing the mob on the US Capitol.
So we can expect that a lot of, those past rivalry and what, transpired during those, intense hours, few hours where the Capitol Hill was being stormed by the supporters of Donald Trump. What went through, because during the election campaign, people are going to ask questions and they are going to, criticize each other, and then they are going to reveal things also. So in fact, Mike Pence will still be sounding a little more moderate, that he tried to protect the democratic setup and the value of USA, and he did not budge despite the pressure coming from his boss, then President Donald Trump. So this is something that is going to cash on when he will be campaigning across USA against Donald Trump, while Donald Trump will continue to criticize him for not obeying him or letting the rigging happen across the USA, which cost him the presidential election. Apparently, in Donald Trump's view, Mike Pence can always stand that he has stood by the side of institution, and this is one allegation that Democrats have always put against Republicans, that they don't respect institutions, they don't respect democratic values and openness and transparency. So Mike Pence can very well defend himself in that way, that he has always stood by the institutions, and this is why, despite all the pressure, he did not budge and let the democratic process take over. What happened during the Capitol riots, we know that Mike Pence was very instrumental in not letting things go worse. He, in fact, called the security. He was in touch with the people. He did not declare the rigging the way Donald Trump wanted. So clearly, those are the probably aspects that Mike Pence would like to cash upon while he will be campaigning for his presidential race for 2024.
Right, the political campaign will only get sharper. Thank you, Abhishek, for joining us on the broadcast with that piece of breaking news. Shifting focus, politics over the Odisha train tragedy continues to snowball, ladies and gentlemen. The opposition is demanding the resignation of Railways Minister Ashwini Vaishnav, accusing the government of ignoring several safety recommendations, specifically the Kavach system, the technology that prevents head-on collisions. Congress Chief Mallikarjun Kharge wrote a letter to Prime Minister Modi raising several questions, stating that the government is focusing on strengthening the railways, but in a very superficial manner. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi also hit out at the BJP while addressing the Indian diaspora in New York. He claims Congress ministers took moral responsibility in the past, accusing the Modi government of ignoring its failures. Meanwhile, West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee has said, and I quote, "Dal mein kuch kala hai," accusing the centre of ignoring glitches in the signal system. The opposition has also accused the centre of using the CBI to shield the railway minister of any moral responsibility. The big question remains, is politics superseding an investigation to find the truth as the lens shifts to the sabotage angle?
ट्रेन में जा रहे थे, अचानक से डोलने लगा। डोलते डोलते ट्रेन रेल लाइन से नीचे नम गया और पत्थर में चलने लगा।
उन लोगों के सामने तो मैं सोच रहा था सब लोग मर ही गए, मैं भी तो सोच रहा मर ही गए।
पैर नीचे कर दिया, पैर में चोट आ गया। उसके बाद ट्रेन पलटी खा गया, पटरी से उतर गया। उसके बाद मेरा पेट में खर्च हो गया।
एकदम नॉर्मलाइजेशन की तरफ ले जाना है और बहुत ही संवेदना के साथ जिन परिवारों के मेंबर्स खो गए उनको किसी न किसी जल्दी से जल्दी उनके पास उनके परिवारजन पहुंचे, ये हमारा दायित्व भी खत्म नहीं हुआ। आगे की इंक्वायरी के लिए, आगे के इन्वेस्टिगेशन के लिए केस को, इस पूरे मामले को सीबीआई के पास देने का रेलवे बोर्ड की तरफ से रिकमेंडेशन किया जा रहा है।
We are standing outside the station and this is the relay room of the station. In this room, that automated software automatic logic system is placed and generally there is no chance of doing something with it.
It is the fault of the British that the train has crashed. No, the Congress minister, I remember, said it is my responsibility the train has crashed. I am resigning.
अब ये कैसे एक्सीडेंट हो गया है, इस